Japan taught me to respect my elders. Silicon Valley to bet on youth. But what if they're both wrong about what makes someone actually worth listening to? I've lived across 3 continents and 4 countries, and every single place treats wisdom differently. Some worship age, some worship success, and others, credentials. I think they're all missing what actually matters. Let me start in the place that has challenged my thinking the most. The first extreme, Asia. First, a very big fat caveat and some context. This is my personal experience. And I'm not trying to say that all of Asia is one way or that all the US is another, but what I am trying to say is that I've noticed some patterns in my experience and what feel like some real pros and cons. So as I go through each of these places, I'm gonna share what resonated with me, what I rejected ultimately, and at the very end of this video, my takeaway from it all. And to do that for East Asia, I think I need to give some context about the Eastern perspective. The first thing is that it is collectivistic in nature. In the US, we're very individualistic, meaning we think about ourselves first. We are the main thing. What do I want? What do I need? What am I going to do? In Eastern Asia, Japan, Korea, China, those places, it is very collectivistic, which means that it is the focus on the other. And you're gonna see that play out a lot if you ever go there. The second thing is that it is monocultural, meaning Japan is predominantly Japanese people. Korea, predominantly Koreans. There are not that many places in the world that are like this, and this monocultural element is a very big factor. The third thing is that these are high context cultures. Now, high context means basically that everybody understands the rules. It's very underwritten in the society. Everybody knows what is right, what is wrong, what is expected of them. And for better or worse, this impacts everything about the way that Asia works. It shapes society, it shapes culture, the hierarchy of things, how you talk to other people. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind as I go over what resonated with me from Asia. The first thing that really stuck out was that there's a reverence for experience and tradition. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. When you go in the subway in Japan or Korea, there's a spot for elderly people and for pregnant people. When you walk on like an escalator, it's very normal to step to one side so that elderly people have more space. There's just these things that are built into the culture when it comes to respecting people that you don't know. When you talk to somebody that you don't know, you give them a certain honorific. And if they're older than you, for sure you're gonna use the same honorific there too. So it's built into the languages even, this reverence for experience and tradition. And I think that they understand that some wisdom only comes from years of living. The second thing is that there is definitely a focus on the collective good. I think this goes back to the fact that these countries are collectivistic and monocultural. They build the entire society around this attitude of the collective good is most important. And one of the things that really, everybody loves when they go to Asia is how clean it is, how safe it feels, how inviting it seems. And that's because this other-centeredness is so integral to the fabric of the culture. Even when people are upset about stuff, they're very polite. And I think the collective good is the reason why. The third thing is that there is a respect for patterns that you only see from repetition. And then there's a value of learning from those mistakes that happened in the past. If you've ever been to Japan, the subway system is amazing. It's so intricate. It's actually designed after ant tunnels. There's just like so many things that just work so well and so seamlessly. It's like clockwork, right? This, I think, is because of this respect for these patterns that I was talking about. And honestly, there's a lot more chaos in the West because we don't tend to have this attitude. This is what I reject about my Asian experience, if you will. The first thing is that age can become a proxy for wisdom very quickly. There are older people, not all of them, but some of them, who even without actual insight, they have to be treated with deference and you just have to do what they tell you to do. And it's very easy to let that kind of power corrupt you. And I saw that in my own experience as a foreigner in Korea. I had like these old ladies bumping me out of the way in the street. We've got like 6 feet distance between us. I'm walking one way, they're walking the other. She body checks me out of the way. And I'm like, that's one of those things. It's kind of weird. Older teachers really, they'd paid their dues already, and so they kind of got to do less work. And then the younger teachers, they had to put in way more work and they weren't necessarily paid more for it. And it's just kind of one of these things. There's a seniority prison, if you will, this automatic authority, even if the person doesn't have good ideas, even if they have bad ideas. And the other side of that is that young people will often stay silent, even if they have insight, because they're not going to be listened to, because it's not their time. In Japan, it's this shogunai attitude, which is just like, okay, it is what it is. It's almost like, I don't know if it's nihilistic, but it's just like, oh, well, we can't do anything about it. That is the way it is. They even have a phrase. It's called, the nail that sticks up gets the hammer. It's baked into the society that you don't want to go against the grain. And I think that's because they want society to be orderly, but there's definitely a lot of younger people that are left out because of that. The second thing is that the system is kind of more important than the people. It's a check the box sort of attitude at work, or you go up the ladder because you don't want to stand out. You don't want to make your boss look bad by making a decision without first talking to him about it. Or you don't want to be the guy who tried to do that and made a mistake, because it is not acceptable. And so thinking outside of the box really ends up being just beaten out of you in school in a lot of ways. And I can only imagine for Japanese people or Korean people who are more creative in this system, it can be very stifling. That structure kind of punishes speaking out to elders or being too creative in the way you do things. And so a funny example of how frustrating this could be is when my wife and I were leaving Japan. We were leaving before our phone plan was over, and we ended up spending, like, no joke, 8 hours over 3 days talking to multiple people about how to cancel our phone plan, and they just couldn't figure it out. First we talked to the store clerk, then they brought in a manager, then we did a 3-way call with somebody from corporate over in Tokyo, and at the end of it all, they were just like, hey, keep your money for now, and when you come back to Japan next time, you can pay us. Even though I tried to give them cash, I did everything I could, they just didn't want to. There wasn't a protocol for this, so they weren't gonna do it. And I don't know, I just think that embodies that whole check the box attitude. The third thing is that this oneness, the monocultural element, can sometimes lead to a closing off to other perspectives. It can feel stubborn, it can feel a little closed off and unwilling to learn from those other places. And I don't know, there's some good to that, but there's also some real negatives. So if Asia's reverence for age and tradition embodies one end of the cultural extreme, then the US and Silicon Valley's obsession with youth would be its opposite. The US is an interesting case study because it has both extremes in open warfare. There is a huge generational divide taking place in the US right now, and I think we can see some of the reasons why through the framework of boomers versus Gen Z. First, let's start with the Silicon Valley Gen Z youth extreme. Here's what resonates with me. Being young, being part of the youth, brings with it an attitude of unlearning. And what I mean by that is young people aren't trapped by how it's always been. They're willing to question assumptions freely. And this means that there can be progress in the truest sense of the word. Things that we didn't think were possible can be done by young people. They don't have blinders to what's possible. They don't know what's possible. And so I think they're willing to move fast and break things, as Silicon Valley likes to say. The second thing is that being young brings with it an ability to experiment without fear of failure. I think there's a lot of young people who suffer from a lot of anxiety and that this can kind of stifle this attitude. But generally speaking, being young allows you to be fearless and to bring fresh perspectives to see what maybe experience misses. And that leads to innovation. Some amazing innovations, technologies, and other things come from not knowing what's impossible. The third thing is that young people are able to call out the systems that genuinely need disruption. The fact that healthcare is so broken in the US is super obvious to any young person. And we're not afraid to talk about it. And same thing with work-life balance. I think young people have noticed that this is not healthy, it doesn't make sense. And some of the traditional 9-to-5 things are pretty antiquated in a way that they don't have to be. But here's what I reject. The first thing is that disruption is rewarded above everything else. Kind of like out with the old, in with the new, no matter what. And I think it leads to this pushing too far, too fast, reactionarily. Like if you're upset with the way that older people can be stubborn and then you just do the other way just cuz. And that leads to my second thing that I reject about US culture, and the Gen Z culture at least, is there's this okay boomer attitude. It's a dismissal of decades of wisdom. I think it becomes, again, a reactionary attitude of age means irrelevant. Tradition is often seen as antiquated. In fact, I don't know, that's how it's been. I think it's changing a little bit, and I think that's a good thing that it's changing, because I think you lose a lot by having that attitude. The third thing is that sometimes there's a confidence that comes without competence. If you're inexperienced and you don't know about stuff, but you're able to kind of walk the walk, so to speak, you can mislead a lot of people. It's gonna end up in fire for you and the people around you. And I see this sometimes, especially with the viral equals expert thing that happens in culture. You can become an expert overnight, but do you really know what you're doing? All right, so that brings us to the boomers. And this could be a very long section, but I'm gonna try to keep it tight. The first thing I wanna talk about is what resonates: the lived experience. They've lived through economic cycles, crashes, recoveries. Their parents and grandparents lived through the Depression and World War II. There's things there that I just haven't experienced that is important to pay attention to. They've built careers, companies, and institutions that are still around, and that's impressive. And I think there's a lot I could learn from business, for example, from people older than me. And they have experience with human nature over decades that shouldn't just be, I don't know, tossed out. The second thing is that they understand the long-term consequences of things, or rather, they could if they are a wise boomer. They've seen the script play out far more than we have, and so I guess maybe they can notice some of those things, potentially. But here's what I reject. Oftentimes there's this, we did it this way and it worked attitude that totally ignores the changing landscape that's happening around them. Pay your dues and just climb this ladder that's broken is so stupid. Meanwhile, they're hoarding power and positions and past effectiveness without recognizing that they had it better than the next generation. I mean, just look at the cost of housing or anything else. It's not the same playing field. And the second thing is an unwillingness to admit the system is broken. The economy is broken, housing is broken, and there's not really an admittance that they added to that's partly their fault. The third thing is they're running companies or countries while refusing to listen to the next generation is so infuriating. They're dismissing youth as entitled and lazy and rash and naive because they don't want to understand them. And they're acting like they can't understand them, even though they aren't trying. Why is the clash so much more visible in a place like the US than it is in some place like Asia? I think because there are two warring perspectives with a real lack of trust or respect for each other. And that is stoked by an environment that encourages two extremes. There's a generational wealth gap that's happening that is very clear and very visible and growing, and that leads to resentment for the two sides. There's social media amplifying the conflict and just keeping you inside an echo chamber where you keep hearing your side, and it just kind of builds up this intensity. And then there's a political system that seems to be controlled by the older generation, and it's directly affecting the younger generation that doesn't agree with what's being done. And media seems to profit from that generational conflict. It just seems to put more fuel on the fire. And so it kind of stokes things up more and more to more extreme positions. And on top of all that, there's no institutional buffer like there are in some other places, and there's no cultural deference for age like there is in Asia. So there's really nothing in the US that's keeping people from getting at each other's throats and saying exactly how they feel about things, but then being stuck inside their own echo chamber where they're preaching to their own choir, and they feel so certain they understand the way it all is. And that's the imbalance. It's not that youth or experience is wrong. is that the US has created a war inside of a dialogue. It's a social structure that rewards conflict. Media, politics, algorithms, and there's zero cultural script for synthesis. On top of it all, there's kind of a little bit of a winner-takes-all mentality that prevents any golden mean from occurring. While the US and Asia seem to represent two polar extremes, Europe actually offered something I felt drawn to. Europe is an interesting attempt at a middle ground because it shows some of the pros and some of the cons of each extreme. If I'm honest, it's also the place I feel the most drawn to but know the least, and I think it does come with its own set of drawbacks, which I'm gonna mention. But first, let's get into what resonates. The first thing is that regulations and systems are designed to defend and promote the common good. I really am drawn to that aspect of Europe. Things like the way that they make sure that food is healthy. High fructose corn syrup? Sorry, you just can't sell it in food. If it has aluminum in it, you can't eat it. That seems so simple and so straightforward and so obvious that I don't understand why this doesn't happen in the US, for example. And I think it's because there is an attitude that these systems are supposed to be designed to defend and promote the common good that feels a little like it's absent from the US. We're a little too capitalist here or something, I don't know. The second thing is a respect for rigor and depth. You see this in the intellectual tradition. It seems to matter in Europe a lot. There's this value of really serious study over time. I know a lot of very hardworking, well-educated people in Europe. And I think part of it is like an attitude of building real expertise, not just focusing on age or disruption knowledge. The third thing is that there's an age and cultural diversity in Europe that I think allows it to be less intense than the US. People in Germany are predominantly German, people in Ireland, predominantly Irish, Spain, Spanish, for thousands of years. And so I think that they still have these national identities that are really strong while also having like an EU identity in these places. It allows them to have more curiosity and more openness to differing views and less violent arguments. And it's not because they're better or smarter, but maybe just because those cultures have lived through that longer. You know, the US is a younger cousin, Asia's an older one. Every time I talk to a European, I love that they are interested in the way things are in the US, but they're not ever gonna yell or get angry at me. And I think that leads to a lot more constructive open dialogue and understanding compared to the US, and I love that. Here's what I reject, or rather, maybe I should say, here's where I feel like some of the imbalance comes in. That wisdom can be gated behind bureaucracy. If you don't have the right degree, if you don't have the right connection, your insights can be dismissed. The second thing is that the regulatory stamps that are meant for the common good can also make things harder or slower or too expensive, for example, for the entrepreneurial spirit to reign the way it does in the US. And I see this even in my attempts to potentially move to Europe. It's very difficult. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of things to figure out. What I'm gonna do, what are taxes gonna be like, when am I gonna be accepted in? There's just a lot that's going on there that could be difficult. But if you look at all these places, there's kind of a propensity to the extremes, right? And each place is gonna yell that they feel like their way is best. But what fascinates me is that this is not a new conversation. Society's been trying to solve this puzzle for thousands of years. In fact, two of the wisest voices in human history, one Eastern, one Western, discovered their own piece of this puzzle a long time ago. And it's only when I put both of their insights together that I felt like I was starting to get a fuller picture. If we look at the East, we have Confucius. Confucius has one of my favorite quotes about wisdom. He says there are three paths to wisdom. The first is reflection, which is the noblest. The second is imitation, which is the easiest. And the third is experience, which is the bitterest. Now you notice Confucius does not give one path to wisdom. It's not just age. It's not just experience, there are multiple paths to wisdom. So when I look at this, I kind of hold this up as a lens against some of the different cultures and a critique, if you will. The US, what's going on there, you know? And same thing with the East, ironically. There's some things here that are lost. It's not age or experience. The second source of wisdom that I really feel drawn to is Socrates in the West. And he says this about wisdom, quote, The only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. This kind of humility-centric attitude towards wisdom is so important, I think, in our culture. When you think you've figured it all out, you've stopped being wise. And again, I see this as a lens to look at and critique the individual relationships and the cultures that I'm looking at. Where does true wisdom come from? There has to be a humility element, and there's not one source. Those are the two takeaways from those two people. And here's the pattern. The ideal is universal across cultures. Reflection, humility, experience, they all matter. And you can find this in Japan, you can find this in Silicon Valley, and you can find this in Europe. The problem is that social structures seem to reward extremes. Asia overweighs experience and age. Silicon Valley overweighs youth and disruption. And Europe tends to overweigh credentials and rigor. None of these are wrong, they're just imbalanced. And that's where Aristotle's golden mean comes in for me. There's virtue that lies between extremes. You have to find a way to react and then counterbalance back to the middle. You need experience and you need fresh thinking. You need rigor and you need openness to unconventional thinking. You need humility and confidence. Some wholesale adoption of any one culture, any one way, but a synthesis of the best parts while trying to avoid the extremes. And that's the balance I'm trying to build. In other words, you need to develop a personal filter. So over time, I've developed my own personal filter that I pulled from my experiences across all three of these worlds, and this is my attempt at the golden mean. Here are the markers that I look for from all three worlds when it comes to my personal filter. The first is experience tempered by humility. I think it's important to continue to keep learning, and part of that is admitting and acknowledging when I got something wrong and when I need to grow. And if somebody can prove to me that what I did was wrong or the way that I see something is wrong, that's a gift. That's an opportunity to become more wise and to learn more. The second thing is a willingness to experiment without arrogance. And this is a tough one for me. I think there's a perfectionist element that I'm afraid to fail, but learning from failures is one of the best ways to grow. And I need to be able to continue to learn from failures and even double down on them and change my attitude about failing. That's a good thing. The third thing is to have depth without gatekeeping. And again, these are things that I'm looking for in myself and in the people around me when it comes to wisdom. So depth without gatekeeping is, are you putting in deep work into one thing? Are you learning about it? And are you willing to share that knowledge? Or am I hoarding it? The fourth thing is self-awareness of limitations. Do I know what I don't know? Am I willing to keep learning, or am I closed off to learning about something? Those are really important things. Understanding what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, focusing on my strengths, but also acknowledging where I fall short. And there's a paradox that comes in with this. I think the first thing is that you have to be able to listen universally, meaning I want to approach every conversation assuming that I can learn from that other person because that person has inherent dignity and they deserve respect, which means I should be listening to what they have to say. The second thing that happens with the paradox is you have to have the universal listening, but you also have to have what I like to call selective counsel, meaning when you're making major decisions, you need to be ruthless discerning who you should listen to. Everyone has an opinion. Online especially, but not everybody has the right to advise you. I think that's the attitude that is necessary. There's a lot of bad information online, a lot of stuff that can lead you the wrong way. And so you have to have a filter. Does this person have skin in the game? Are they actually walking the walk? Have they done the thing? Are they practicing what they preach? And do they have my best interest in mind? If the answer is no, then I want to be careful not to listen to them. So that's kind of the distinction. Is I want to listen openly to everyone because of respect and humility, but I want to seek counsel selectively because I want to find someone who's actually wise and I want to discern well. Most people only do one of these things. I think you need to do both. But I'll be honest, this is really messy in real life. And that's why I want to talk about what I've learned from each of these places and what I'm trying to do about that moving forward. Here's what Asia taught me. Wisdom is meant to be shared. Respect is a necessary thing, and you should be doing it for the things that came before you, the people that came before you, because some kinds of wisdom only come with the passage of time. The second thing is to seek out people different than myself. I want to read more, I want to reflect more, and I want to do it more diversely. It's amazing how differently Asians design things than they do in the US, for example. Even the way they think about certain things. And that's beautiful to me. That's like something I want in my life. I want that kind of variety, that kind of challenging spark. I want to consult people who've walked the path before me in whatever domain I'm pursuing, whether that's as a parent, I want people further ahead than me that I can look up to. As a business owner, I want that. In my relationships, I want people that I can model, like friends that I really look up to and admire. And I don't want to dismiss the elderly for Silicon Valley's move fast culture. Here's what the US has taught me. Extremes talk past each other. They don't talk to each other. And when each side is so busy defending themselves and their position, no one can hear the wisdom or even what you have in common with the other side. And that is such a recipe for chaos and distrust and unhappiness. The other thing is that environment is a huge factor, a bigger factor than most of us realize in the way that we live our life. And so it's super important to cultivate your environment very carefully. And I mean this in your relationships and where you live, like physically. It really matters the way your house is organized. The next thing is to make rapid, tiny experiments in my life. Just to have an attitude that's different about failure, a more positive attitude, to make mistakes and do it often and do it freely because I want to learn. I don't want to chase perfection and I don't want to wait for permission. Here's what Europe taught me. Slowing down is not a bad thing. In fact, if anything, it's a necessary component to longevity and happiness. And we're not robots programmed for the purpose of productivity. We're human beings and we need rest and we need relaxation and we need to take ourselves seriously. Life is too short to think that way all the time, and I think something Europeans seem to have right. Another thing that Europe taught me is that the system can and it should fight for the common good. I want to see more of that kind of thing in the US, where healthcare and food and stuff is just, it's more geared towards protecting people and not allowing people to be taken advantage of. And data privacy, AI, healthcare, all those things. We should do this as a society. Wherever you are, you should be trying to protect the common good for everyone. The next thing is to study seriously, adding breadth and depth in areas that matter. I don't want to stop at can we? I always want to ask, should we? Is it worth diving into something head first? Or maybe are the costs not that good for me and for the people around me? I also want to learn from people who don't have credentials, people who have quietly put in the work. So here's the goal. It's not about picking a side. It's about building a personal philosophy that is the best of each extreme. And it's a balance, hopefully in the middle, and to never become too rigid to course correct or rebalance. I think there's a lot of pendulum swing that happens in life. You overreact one way and you gotta come back to the center. And I think that's why your credo or your personal filter, it needs to be a living credo. It needs to change with time and experience. And that's harder than following one cultural script, but I think it's where actual wisdom lives. If this has challenged how you think about wisdom and you're looking for more ways to level up your life, check out this video where I share 3 hard-won lessons on breaking screen addiction. Thanks for watching.